I think the fact that it's taken me this long to review Far Cry 5 pretty much sums up my initial thoughts on the game. It wasn't a game I was really looking forward to going into it, especially since I've been coming down with a serious case of Far Cry fatigue. Far Cry 4 was pretty much a big disappointment for me. It was a game that I really struggled to enjoy playing, and less said about Primal the better. So I really didn't have much expectation going into Far Cry 5. In fact, to be quite honest, I didn't really have any. I just expected an average game and to maybe have a good time, but not really to get an experience that was better than what I got in 3, 2, or maybe even the first game. And to some degree, that's pretty much what I got in this game. While there were a few good areas of enjoyment and surprise and very, very limited areas, Far Cry 5 was pretty much overall what I expected it to be. A typical open world Ubisoft game with a few cool, interesting villains, but were completely underdeveloped, and a story that I really could not care less about. Yeah, the gameplay was open-ended and fun, but did I really have a good, memorable time? Honestly, I didn't. The story of Far Cry 5 takes place in Hope County, Montana, and you play as an unnamed deputy who, along with your other deputies and sheriff, go to arrest Joseph Seed, the leader of Eden's Gate, a malicious cult who has taken over the entire area and held all of the civilians under their captivity. After the arrest of him goes south, you end up trapped in the county and separated from your fellow deputies. It's up to you to rescue them and take them all down, as well as the other members of the Seed family. And that is literally it. That is the story of Far Cry 5, because it really does not go anywhere more advanced than that. The story for me was just one of the worst elements of the game. I found the story incredibly hard to follow because it was just so bland and lacking in any certain areas of depth or even interest. I never really cared about my other deputies, so I never cared about rescuing them, so the whole premise of the game for me was kind of pointless, because if I don't care about the people I'm rescuing, how am I supposed to care about what's going on? It's ridiculous at this point. I think Far Cry 4 was incredibly guilty of this. I didn't care about the people I was trying to save, because not only did I not care about them, I didn't care about the character I played as. And in this game, your main playable character is a mute. You don't speak throughout the entire game, and I think this was a really poor choice by Ubisoft, because taking away your main playable character's voice when everybody else is talking so much to you, it felt so unnatural, but not in a good way. I felt like there was no real proper memorable interactions or encounters with even, you know, your allies or the enemies, because you didn't have a voice. I mean, one of the best things about Far Cry 3 and, you know, why the scenes with the villains, especially Vass and Jason, worked was because of the fact that there was a constant back and forth between the two of you. You responded to what he said. It felt like you as the player, but the actual main protagonists themselves was actually acknowledging what was going on. In here, it's almost like you're a bypasser, and I just don't enjoy that, and it really kind of took me out of the game. It really made it harder for me to get invested in what was going on because my character didn't have a voice, and it was just a shame. The side villains of this game as well are really poor. Jacob Seed is literally just a yes man who goes on about some artsy-fartsy war bullshit, and he was just a very boring character. I didn't care about him whatsoever. All of your encounters with him are like in this prison cell, and I just didn't find him interesting. I mean, there's some cool segments when you go into his missions where it's like you have to kill all these people within a certain timer, but they didn't really add to his character. It was just more interesting gameplay segments, but not really anything that helped improve him as a character. John Seed is pretty much just a Bible nerd. That's all he is. He really just sits there quoting stuff from the Bible. There were some interesting elements with the fact that he was a bit scared of Joseph Seed, but they never really explored that. He had room to be interesting, but they just made him so bland for me. And the voice actor I didn't think was very good either. They just kind of hired this squeaky guy to try and play this menacing person, but it just didn't work for me. The only reason Faith is somewhat memorable is because at least your encounters with her were quite distinguishable from the other ones. You know, I can't really remember much about my interactions with John or Jacob Seed because they were quite boring, very slow paced. I didn't care about what was going on, but at least with Faith, because of her character and the fact that she uses bliss, and every time you see her as in like this hallucinogenic state, it at least makes your scenes of her more memorable, and the things that happened with her I felt impacted me a bit more, only because of the surrealism of them. Faith Seed, for that only reason, is the better one, but as a character I still found her very unthreatening in my opinion. That's the thing. Even though she's probably the most memorable one of the three, she's by far the least threatening in my opinion. So I just didn't really enjoy any of the three side villains. And another issue I have with the story is that there is no proper narrative thread, because of the fact that the game is so open-ended that it will let you complete missions at any time in any given order. This in turn affects the story, because every cutscene has to be made in a way that the game acknowledges that not every player has had them in the same order. There is no real like thread through them, like acknowledging things that have already happened or things that will come up. It all feels very loose and disjointed, and I didn't like that because it made me feel as if the writers had not put enough effort into the story. I wish that they had at least included, you know, scenes or lines that reference previous actions, as if the game can remember what you've done and what you haven't done and address that in cutscenes for different gamers. I would have appreciated that, but because of the fact that the game is so open-ended, it ends up being at the cost of the story, and I think that wasn't a really good sacrificial choice. And also the main story missions where you encounter the main villains, I felt were very, very distracting, because to earn these story missions, you have to collect resistance points within the 3 regions of the map. But the problem is that once you get to that amount, the villain sends like a hunting squad after you. But then if they hit you with one of these bliss bullets, or I think that's what they're called in the game, what happens is you're then completely taken out of whatever you were doing and chucked into a completely different area. And what annoyed me was that oftentimes I'd be doing side missions, and then all of a sudden they would just come in and take me out of my side mission and just be like, oh, you're doing a side mission? Well, fuck you, it's story time. That's how it felt like to me. It just felt very abstract and very frustrating, because I'm trying to progress through the game, and all of a sudden the game doesn't really let me have the option to go and take the story mission. It's just, oh no, we're dragging you out of what you're doing and we'll take you to that story mission. It felt wrong because it just took away so much of that freedom that the Far Cry series for me is very well known for. But by far my biggest problem with Far Cry 5 is the endings. The 2 endings of the game, they are some of the worst multiple choice endings I have ever seen for a game. I hated these endings. Now, I chose the resist ending, which is the one where you fight back against Joseph Seed at the end of the game. What you're then given with is an awful boss battle where you basically have Joseph Seed as a bullet sponge enemy. You have to go ahead and try to retrieve all of your allies you've built up throughout the entire game from being affected by the bliss, and you defeat Joseph Seed. You're about to go in and arrest him with your fellow deputies, and then a nuclear bomb goes off. You all have to get into a car, you have to go back to your main base where you were at the start of the game. All of your fellow deputies die, Joseph Seed makes it out, he drags you into the base, and then you two just kind of sit there, and I hate the ending. And then the other ending where you walk away is almost as bad. Like, you walk away with your fellow deputies and there's a slight chance that you'll get the National Guard to come in and help you, but then the player's like eyesight goes red, the screen cuts to black. It's pretty much implied that you go ahead and kill all of your fellow deputies. The reason I don't like the endings to this game is because they completely negate and contradict the entire tone of the game before then. You know, Far Cry 5 is a very uplifting game. It's a game with an uplifting tone, a tone of like hope that you can do this, that you can eventually get over these hardships and, you know, save the county. So these endings just felt like they came out of nowhere, and I just didn't find myself really enjoying them. To me, honestly, they just kind of felt like rip-offs of the Far Cry 4 ending. Was Pagan Min right the whole time? Was he actually a better person than the people you ultimately sided with in the game, suggesting that the villain was right? So Far Cry 5 does the exact same option, where it tries to suggest that Joseph Seed was right the entire time, and it just doesn't work. Like I said, it contradicts the whole tone of the game. And even the fact that this game has like an ending in the first 10 minutes, just like Far Cry 4's, and it's almost the same as Far Cry 4's, it's just, I just didn't enjoy it. The story was easily the worst aspect of the game for me. I found it really uninteresting. Joseph Seed as a villain in himself wasn't even that amazing. I mean, he was the most dynamic out of the 4, but I didn't find him anywhere near as memorable or complex as Vass or Pagan Min, and so as for a result, the story of Far Cry 5 is easily the worst element of the game for me, at least. Contrary to the story though, the presentation of Far Cry 5 is very, very good. I think graphically the game looks very, very nice, and it ran at a very good frame rate for me on my PS4. I didn't really experience any drops below 30, and just the views you can get from some of the areas on the map are phenomenal. And what I really liked was the fact that each area of the game all felt different to one another. They felt like they didn't feel like they just copied and pasted the same area 3 times on the map. They all felt different, and that was a very nice thing to see because it made traversing them feel very diverse and fun. The only thing I will say about the presentation I didn't like was that some of the character models looked pretty bad, to be personally honest. And the problem is that the game, for some reason, doesn't have actual in-game cutscenes all that often. They only really happen during like the main story missions that you get from resistance points in the game. Apart from then, you don't get any proper cutscenes, and as a result, it does make the character models look pretty shit, which is what I didn't like. I wish there were actual more cutscenes, because instead you get like these in-game ones, but they don't really do the graphics of the game much justice. So I would have preferred if they just done pre-rendered cutscenes for the majority of the game. I would have rather sat through them than the awful in-game ones we ultimately get. But apart from that, the presentation of this game is beautiful. It's definitely one of the better looking Ubisoft games, especially to come out in recent memory. Gameplay is probably going to be the hardest area for me to talk about, because if you've played Far Cry 3 or Far Cry 4, you are going to find many similarities between this game, and that'll either be a good thing or a bad thing, dependent on how fatigued you are coming with this series gameplay. This was the area I was the most worried about, because I just knew it was going to be the same as those previous 2 games, but at least at first seems to be like new areas or new ideas that they've put into the game. So for example, there are no radio towers like you had in 3 and 4. The radio towers are now gone. The entire map is open to you from the start, unlike the previous 2 games where you had one area of the map at the first like half of the game, then the second half of the game you unlock a new region. The whole map is open to you from the very beginning. However, what they don't tell you is that the only way to actually access new safe houses or discover areas on the map is you actually have to travel to them on foot or on foot vehicles. So if you try and get to there via helicopter or plane or wingsuit, not going to work. It won't show up on your map. And I found that really frustrating, because I tended to use those 3 airborne tactics of maneuvering around the map quite often. So I found it very frustrating that the game did not actually let you access new areas or show new areas on your map when you're flying in the air. I felt that was a very poor decision, and it's a shame that even 3 months later Ubisoft still hasn't added this into the game, and I think it's probably one of the biggest frustrations that I have, because like I said, I travelled so much airborne in this game, but I unlocked very little on my map because the game wouldn't let me open these new areas up because I wasn't travelling on foot, which I just felt was a little bit of a strange decision to me personally. They also added a new stealth mechanic of sorts into this game, where basically you can use different melee weapons in stealth, but it doesn't really add much, and I would argue it makes stealth feel more clunky, especially when you're trying to link multiple takedowns or try to add something else onto a takedown, like if you wanted to throw a knife after you've stabbed an enemy in a stealth takedown, or if you want to grab the enemy's sidearm and shoot it. These felt very clunky in the game, and I remember these in Far Cry 3 and even 4. They felt very clean, easy to use, you knew what you were doing, the game was very good in the way that it helped remind the players about these abilities that you unlocked, whereas in this game I just felt like it was very clunky. Half the time when I tried to use the ability to use an enemy's pistol when I'd done a stealth takedown on them, it wouldn't work for some reason. I kept on trying to press L2 and it wouldn't let me. So I personally found that decision to not make the stealth as as functional as they were in the previous 2 games. I don't understand how they managed to make it worse, and the new melee system they have in the game I didn't like. It felt clunky in general, but the stealth was the area where it affected the game the most, because it just felt very unnatural, and it made me really dislike using stealth in the game. Like in Far Cry 3 and 4 I used stealth all the time. In this game I barely used it because it just felt so clunky and unnatural. The first few hours of this game are incredibly boring because of the gameplay. The game restricts so much of what you can use in terms of your weapons, your abilities in game, the different things you can, buy in the store. It's very restrictive, and I didn't like that. I don't like games that completely restrict everything from the very get-go, and especially in the case of this game, because it made it so utterly boring. Like for the most of the first 4 hours, I was only carrying around 2 weapons, and it was very generic and boring, and enemies would constantly be popping up, and I just got bored of it after a while, because it felt very repetitive doing the exact same tasks. Now I will say, once you get past those opening 4 hours, the game does get a lot better when it lets you unlock more things from your skill tree, and it lets you have more weapons. It does get more fun. But those first 4 or 5 hours, they were very, very hard to get through. And there were quite a few areas in the game where I felt the gameplay just got very monotonous, and I got bored of it quite frequently. But the first 4 hours definitely the worst. But after then, as long as you can find it in your head to keep on playing, it does get better. I did appreciate that the open world was completely free to explore from the beginning. That was a very nice addition to the game, just because it didn't feel as restrictive as the previous games. But like I spoke about in my story section, the issue that this comes with is the fact that the game's story suffers from it, because of the fact that, like I said, every cutscene has to be made knowing that not every player has received them in the same order. But then again, the story is so awful in this game anyway, that I really don't think that's much of a detriment to the gameplay. It's more of a detriment to the story, so I won't try and repeat myself there. But yeah, it's nice to have that openness, but I did feel like it came at the cost of the story, which I wasn't happy with. And my last big thing I want to talk about the gameplay is a lot of the big features that they removed in this game in terms of the gameplay. For example, there's no crafting system in this game, which I didn't like. It was one of my favourite areas of Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4, but in Far Cry 5, it's non-existent. All you do when you skin an animal is sell it for money. And then they added this new feature in, like the fishing minigame. Everyone was talking up about, oh, it's this really addictive thing. I got bored of it after like 10 minutes and I just gave up. Thankfully, there's only one mission in the game that forces you to use it. Apart from that, you don't have to use it ever again in the game, and thank fuck. Because if I did, I probably would have fallen asleep halfway through doing it, because it's awful. I really did not like it. It was very monotonous and boring. And it's very repetitive. You're just doing the same thing over and over again, trying to fucking catch a fish, but just at different levels of difficulty. It's really boring. I don't know why everyone's giving it so much praise. Far Cry 5 definitely has elements of value, but I feel like compared to 3 and even to some ways 4, the game just didn't feel as replayable as the other ones. The first big issue and reasoning for this is the fact that you can't have multiple save files in Far Cry 5, which I don't understand. Far Cry 4 and 3, they let you have, I think it was like 3 save files, but this game will only let you have 1. And originally I was going to replay this game again before doing this review, but because of the fact that the game straight up said, nope, you can't restart the game unless you cancel the old save file, it was such a stupid decision. I don't know why they decided on this, and it just felt like a very idiotic feature to me. And the side missions in themselves aren't very memorable. I mean, it took me around probably 11 to 12 hours to beat the main story. Of course, this depends on how quickly you earn the resistance points in each region. It's basically where you complete tasks, and it eventually accrues points. When you get to the max amount, you can take down the villain of that region. Each region took me about probably, I want to say, 3 or 4 hours to beat. They're not very long. As long as you just try hard to find all the story missions and a few side missions, you'll honestly earn them very quickly, and they don't really take very long to liberate each region. The side missions, like I said, were not very fun at all. The Clutch Nixon ones were probably the most memorable, but I only did about 3 or 4 of them, because afterwards I just really couldn't care about playing this game anymore. They do actually include the multiplayer in this game, however it's listed as Far Cry Arcade, because I got very confused at first. I was trying my best to find it, and then I realised that they changed the name of it to Far Cry Arcade. It's very interesting because what they do is they actually let you use the map editor that was in the previous games. You can actually create your own multiplayer maps and then have other players test them out. I think this is a really interesting feature. And it was easily like the value element of the game that I appreciated the most, because this was actually quite fun. I only played a few maps of it on Far Cry Arcade though, because sadly for some reason a lot of my lobby sessions ended up crashing. But from the games that I did play, I really did enjoy them, and I think it's something that can only get better over time as obviously people get more used to the map editor. But from what I played so far, I really enjoyed it. It was very, very fun to use, and it was probably the single most fun part of the game in terms of value and me replaying it. I could see myself replaying Far Cry 5 just for the arcade mode and not so much for the single player, because there's a lot of potential in it, and I definitely think it can definitely reach some very interesting areas as long as people, continue making maps for it. Overall, Far Cry 5 was a pretty mediocre / above average experience. It doesn't compare anywhere near to Far Cry 3 or even Far Cry 2 or 4. I'd even say Far Cry 1 is better than this. It's just a shame because I really want this franchise to get back to what it was. I love Far Cry 3. It's one of my favourite games last generation. I absolutely adore that game. But all I see now is Ubisoft simply milking this series to death just for the sakes of pure financial benefit, and I hate it. I just wish Ubisoft could take just about 3 or 4 years off this series. Don't make any of those crappy spin-off games. Just take 4 years off. Look at what us as fans want. I want a good story in a Far Cry game like you did with 3. I want a protagonist that actually has a character arc and motivations that make sense throughout the entire game and supporting characters that I care about. I want gameplay that actually feels different. And I want a game that isn't concerned with putting so much useless side missions in a game. I want something that creates an experience that I find memorable. And I feel like for as long as Ubisoft is going to try and continuously push games out every 2 years, we're just not going to get that. If the next game in the series doesn't impress me, I'm officially bailing out on this franchise, and it's a shame to say that because I used to adore this series, but right now all I see is it just being dragged to shit. I'm going to give Far Cry 5 the score of a 6.5 out of 10. So thank you all for watching my review of Far Cry 5. I know this has taken a very long time to get out. I basically got caught up with a lot of other personal stuff whilst I was playing this game, and also the fact of, like I said in this review, I found the game quite difficult to play through for a lot of times, hence the reason it's come out so late. But I want to thank you all for being very patient about this. I am trying my best to get reviews out for the games that I've played over the past few months. My next review will most likely either be of A Way Out or God of War when I eventually buy that game, or potentially Detroit Become Human. It depends on the latter two, but I'll definitely try and get my review for A Way Out as soon as possible. With that being said, I want to thank you very much for watching the video. Go ahead and like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more of my gaming stuff, which I'm going to try to do over the rest of the summer break. Tell me in the comment section down below what you thought of this game, and do you agree with my opinions on it, and what do you want to see the most from a Far Cry sequel. That being said, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.